This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to chat with an expert, analyst, and consultant on all things travel, and someone who just took a historic airplane ride that no customer will ever be able to take again. Henry Harteveldt is the president of the Atmosphere Research Group and an av geek in the best sense of the word. He joins us today via Skype from his home in San Francisco. Henry, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you, Mark. I'm glad to be part of it.
Well, I have to tell you, we usually start out these podcasts by asking our guests about the last place they've traveled to or the next place they're going. And you just got back from such an incredible journey. I'd like to start with that. Tell us about your trip to Hawaii a few days ago and why people like me are so jealous.
Well, I was very honored to be invited on United's final 747 passenger flight from San Francisco to Honolulu this past Tuesday. It was a recreation of the airline's first 747 flight 47 years ago, if you can believe it. And it was one of the most memorable flights. It was happy. It was bittersweet. It was fun. It was chaotic. And I have a feeling there were 300-something very hungover passengers the next morning.
What, did you get free champagne or something?
Oh, my goodness. Well, let me just start out by just saying that United really did a truly first-class job. It doesn't matter where in the plane you were sitting. They took wonderful care of the folks who were on the plane, most of whom, by the way, had paid either cash or mileage plus points to be on that flight. They had a reception at San Francisco Gate 86, which they transformed into a groovy 70s-style lounge, complete with orange shag seats and benches to sit on. They had great photos of the 747, including its famous first-class upper deck lounge from the first incarnation of the 747 timeline. There were 10 flight attendants wearing the original 1970 vintage uniforms, augmenting 15 other Honolulu-based flight attendants on the plane. There were speeches in the gate. There were passengers in 70s costumes, most of which reminded us why we're probably very glad the 70s are behind us. The guy who won the prize was in, I kid you not, a lime green plaid leisure suit.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
You know, it was a lot of fun. On the plane, United served Trader Vic's menus. The executive chef for the airline was on board. He and his colleagues had been working on the food and menus for weeks, and he was out at the flight kitchen starting literally a week ago, the Saturday before the flight, to work on the meal preparation. When you sat down, you were welcomed with complimentary Mai Tai, complete with fruit skewer and little paper umbrella.
Wow.
After takeoff, there was a champagne toast. There were trivia contests. It was open bar to passengers in all cabins. They showed 70s movies, including Grease and Tootsie. I'm not sure what else they screened. And frankly, I don't think anybody watched it because the poor flight attendants the entire time kept making these very nice announcements. We'd really like to serve you guys all the drinks and the food that you'd want to have. Can you please clear the aisles? The food was actually quite good. And I will tell you, when that plane landed, it was silent. I mean, people clapped after we landed, but when we were coming in for our final descent into a rainy Honolulu, the plane was silent. I think people realized this was a part of history and a bittersweet moment. Several of the flight attendants told me that they were fighting back tears the entire time because many of them had spent much of their career working on the 747 throughout their careers at United, and it was such a special plane to them. There was a reception in the arrival gate at Honolulu International, speeches by the governor and some other politicians, someone from the airport as well. And United draped a 120-foot lei across the nose of the 747 after we docked at the gate. Then later that afternoon, there was a special employee-only event for the Honolulu employees at the United hangar.
What a truly amazing experience. And I think I saw somewhere, you can fact check us here, but I think I saw where somebody actually proposed on the upper deck during the flight.
You are correct. And if a couple did propose, and the groom-to-be let United know, and the airline worked with him. And in a very gracious move, the head of marketing, the head of Mileage Plus was on the flight. He said United was going to donate 2 tickets to the couple for their honeymoon.
Wow. So she said yes, obviously.
She said yes. And I have a feeling if she didn't, some other single woman on the plane probably would have. But, it really was very special. There were people on the plane whose parents had worked for United on the introduction of the 747, pilots who had flown the 747 from the beginning, but had since retired. There really was a lot of history. There were a lot of shared stories. One passenger on the plane had taken Pan Am's first 747 flight from Kennedy to London. And I don't think he'd been on United's first 747, but he had flown it, very early on. And anyway, lots of great stories, lots of history, lots of laughter, and some tears.
What a great flight that you'll never forget. And listeners, we covered this at voyagereport.com. We've got a whole news article up. And as we mentioned in that article, now Delta is the only remaining U.S. carrier to fly regularly scheduled flights with the 747. And unfortunately, Henry, they're going to be retiring them here within a couple of weeks as well. So let's just talk about why this is happening, why airlines are retiring the 747, also known as the Queen of the Skies.
Right. Well, unlike queens who serve out their terms as long as they're alive, in this case, the Queen of the Skies has been supplanted by her younger sisters.
Dethroned.
Dethroned, if you will. And, if you take a look at it, you go back to when I was at TWA in 1985 when we launched the first 767 nonstops across the North Atlantic. We actually turned to ourselves as we were working on this, and we said, wow, at some point, twin-engine planes will replace the 3- and 4-engine jets that we were operating, the L-1011 and the 747. And we were talking about this and wondering how long it would be, for the 747 to continue flying. As new generation aircraft, such as the 767 and A330, A350, 787, and of course the 777 are able to fly farther with just 2 engines, with just 2 pilots, plus relief crew. Airlines are able to operate more efficient planes that are better sized, frankly, to market demand. From the airline operating standpoint, you want to right-size your aircraft to the mission of the plane in terms of range and customer demand in terms of passenger and cargo, and it's a balancing act. But there are now more fuel-efficient planes that can carry almost as many passengers as the 747 did, in some cases perhaps as much as the 747, depending on the airline's configuration, but again, with just 2 jets and far more fuel efficient.
And I think when we're talking about that fuel efficiency, when you compare the 747, the 4 jets with something like the composite 787 or the A350, I think I saw figures where it was 20, 23, 25% more fuel efficient. That's a significant amount when you're talking about the billions that airlines spend every year on fuel.
You're absolutely right. It's a significant savings on fuel. Some of these new generation aircraft are even more fuel efficient than 777 airplanes, which have been flying only since 1995. And fuel, of course, is one of an airline's largest expenses, along with labor. So even though fuel is down from its historic high 9 or so years ago, it has been creeping up. Oil has been become more expensive over the last few months. And that means airlines are obviously very, very attuned towards how they can save money. Plus, there's the fact that you have only 2 jets to maintain per airplane. So that means fewer jets required, fewer engines required, fewer spares required. And the planes themselves are better designed. They're more rugged. They're even safer than the 747 was. And on the cabins, they have, again, especially the 787 and the A350, more passenger-pleasing amenities, including better pressurization that keeps the plane at a relative lower altitude, higher degrees of humidity, larger windows, and other amenities that we as travelers like.
Let's talk about the state of aviation today.
Sure.
As we reported at voyagereport.com, a record 823 million passengers flew last year on U.S. airlines. So it seems in some ways as though they are much healthier now than they were during the Great Recession. They've exercised their capacity discipline, as we keep reading about a lot. Where are we going in the state of aviation today? Are the airlines healthy?
Financially, they are. The executives who are running the airlines and at the top levels of airlines all are old enough to have seen their carriers go through some financially brutal times. And they don't want to see that happen again. No executive likes putting his company in any industry through a bankruptcy. No executive wants to wipe out shareholder equity or ruin pension plans or employee savings or anything like that. So the good news is that in the U.S., our airlines have essentially right-sized in terms of capacity overall, the types of airplanes they operate, their route networks, and more, to become more financially healthy. Now, a lot of that financial strength does come from consolidation. While there's a lot of competition, and we have 3 very aggressive creative budget airlines that act as price leaders, the 3 largest airlines in the U.S., American, Delta, and United, control more than 60% of the capacity. And when you add in Southwest, the core 4, as I call them, control upwards of 80%. So that gives them enormous clout. It means that they can build fortress hubs. And frankly, one of the concerns I have is you don't have the cat fights that you used to have 10, 20 years ago, where you would have a couple of airlines in a hub duking it out for the customer. There seems to be an unspoken agreement that I won't grow or attack in your hub if you won't grow or attack in mine. Now, a lot of the profitability we've seen at airlines is coming from the growth of ancillary products, optional products that are sold in addition to the base ticket. And a lot of passengers don't like it, but I will say that in our research, around 2/3 of U.S. travelers say that they do feel these optional products give them better control over how they spend their air travel budget.
And we're talking about baggage fees, fees for extra legroom, priority boarding, things like that.
Exactly. Now, the nuisance fees, which really are the baggage fees and the fees to change reservations, customers really don't like those. But people don't mind, for example, having to pay for a meal on the plane. Now, when I worked in marketing, I can tell you we had met with our dining services colleagues and would sometimes spend a day going through menu planning and looking at what we were going to serve our customers in all cabins. We took that very seriously. But as airlines began cutting back, food on the plane, suffered. And frankly, when something goes from being an item that's provided, where it's an expense, to sold, where it's a potential source of profit, all of a sudden airlines have to pay more attention to it. I do think we need more competition, but what we're seeing with the industry right now in the U.S. is the growth, the creativity is really coming from smaller niche carriers. For example, Surf Air out here in California, which offers a subscription-based model, all you can fly, and they fly from general aviation airports, and they try to stay out of the way of traditional airlines. We're seeing growth of jet sharing and fractional ownership. Companies like JetSmarter, which provide an option for those who want it and can afford it to fly on empty seats on executive type jets or other aircraft and avoid some of the hassle of a traditional airline experience.
Well, that's great for shareholders with the state of aviation today. But
Right.
if I'm looking for an empty seat next to me,
You're not going to find an
yeah,
empty seat,
yeah.
and A4A, Airlines for America, the airlines trade group, just announced they expect 3% more people to fly this Thanksgiving period than last year. That means fewer empty seats. The airlines, again, they're right sizing. Going back to the 747 story a moment ago, it used to be common to see 747s flying cross country in the US, or else other wide bodies, 767s, for example. You rarely see that outside of maybe routes like New York or San Francisco to JFK.
I think we saw them briefly, too, unscheduled when they were evacuating people in the path of Hurricane Irma in Florida. I think Delta and perhaps United, I'm not quite sure, used them just for those unscheduled routes as well.
Absolutely, that, and United, I believe, sent a 777-300 to Puerto Rico. But in terms of scheduled everyday use, you rarely see wide bodies flying within the U.S. Airlines don't want to chase the market. They want the market to chase them. The good news, though, from a customer standpoint, is that more airlines are installing in-seat power outlets. More airplanes domestically and long haul have Wi-Fi and streaming entertainment or on-demand entertainment at the seat. The extra legroom seats that are available do provide an option for people to get a more comfortable seat. I'm a fan of the premium economy product that American, Delta, Singapore, Lufthansa, and other airlines have begun to introduce, which offers on long-haul flights an interim. Premium economy is the new business class. Business class is the new first class. So we're seeing this. Now, the other thing that's interesting in aviation are these joint ventures and cross-airline investments. And again, that's a financial thing, but it does end up for the customer sometimes of providing better schedules, more travel options, and easier travel options. But I am concerned about the barriers these create for competition. I'm also a fan of the long-haul, low-cost model, though it's not a product I personally want. I like more comfort than they offer. I really respect the fact that there are airlines out there that are making it more affordable to fly long haul. And I really respect some of the creativity that we're seeing, such as using 737 MAX jets to fly from certain points in Europe to the U.S.
Listeners, we're talking with Henry Harteveldt, the president and travel industry analyst at the Atmosphere Research Group in San Francisco. Henry is prolific on Twitter, and you can follow him at Harteveldt, H. Harteveldt, and you will be in good company. He has 20,700 followers. He's also on Instagram at H. Harteveldt and on LinkedIn at Henry Harteveldt. We're going to be asking Henry just in a moment for some tips for flyers, so you're definitely going to want to stay listening for that. Henry, let's talk about these low-cost carriers. You alluded to it here a moment ago. Mm-hmm. We just did a podcast last week, I think it was, with Pittsburgh International Airport, one of these former hubs that are trying to reinvent themselves. And they've really benefited from these carriers coming in with mid-$200, mid-$300 fares to Europe, across the Atlantic, for example, from WOW, Condor, Norwegian. Talk about a little bit on how those carriers may be changing aviation for people who previously really couldn't afford that $1,000 fare to Paris, for example.
Sure. So the long-haul, low-cost airlines are, for those of you who are airline historians, the latest incarnation, perhaps, of the Laker SkyTrain that pioneered long-haul, low-cost flights along with Iceland Air back in the 1970s. What they do is they operate mostly from secondary airports to the U.S., But what's different is now they are using, in many cases, new generation aircraft. Norwegian, for example, is using 787 Dreamliners and 737 MAX jets. WOW is using new Airbus narrow bodies as well as A330s and others. And the model isn't that different than what we might see here in the U.S. with airlines such as Spirit or Frontier. It's they pack the passengers in. There's minimal legroom in standard economy. There may be extra legroom seats or a premium economy option available, but it's very high density seating. The experience is bare bones, and simply as a consumer, I would say that you do have to watch out for the add-on fees. If you can find a low fare on some of these airlines, it could be great. You maybe enjoy nonstop service versus connecting, or a more efficient connection, depending on where you're going. But they will charge you for a fee. They will charge you a fee for carry-on bags, for checked bags, for meals on the plane, and other products and amenities. What I tell everybody is before you buy on the long-haul low-cost airlines, shop them, see what it's going to cost with all the things you would like to have as part of your journey, and do one last price check with a more traditional airline and just figure out how much the price difference is, if there is any. Also remember that some of these long-haul low-cost airlines operate only a few days a week, sometimes once or twice a week, and they may have very limited connecting options for you when you get to into Europe. So if your flight is delayed or canceled, you may have to wait a long time for the next flight. So, sometimes there is a price to a low fare. But what I like about this is they provide an element of competition, and these low fares can help stimulate travel, both from the U.S. to Europe and from Europe to the U.S. When I was in Hawaii the other day, I noticed that AirAsia X is now flying to Honolulu. And so I expect we will see more of these flights as these carriers expand. And, just wait. It'll only be a matter of time before you see airlines like American or United choose to offer their basic economy deep discount fares to compete with some of these airlines. Again, great for the consumer, but just, be careful that you don't get seduced by a low lead-in fare and then end up paying almost as much as you would on a traditional airline with all the bells and whistles added in.
Absolutely. Somebody asked me about basic economy fares the other day, and I sort of said they're a little bit sneaky. They're kind of sneaky fares because you may not realize you're going to board last. You may have to pay to put something even in the overhead bin. If something goes wrong, you're going to be the last to get help. I mean, but you get what you pay for.
Right.
Let's talk about the airport experience as far as security goes. I came back recently from Vietnam, and I went through Japan, and it was the day after these new mandatory traveler screening interviews expanded worldwide. It used to be only when you were coming back into the U.S., mainly from Europe, you would have these screening interviews. So that's now taking place. We've got expanding biometrics.
Yes.
I live in Washington, D.C., and when I go to Ronald Reagan National Airport, you can actually use your fingerprints at clear security to go through security, go to the gate if you're on Delta, and you don't even have to scan your boarding pass. You just put your fingerprints there at the gate. What do you see the future here for biometrics? You tweeted recently that passengers want it. Airlines can't ignore this. And biometrics offer industry many benefits. Can you talk about that, please?
Yes, absolutely. So I too use Clear. I also use the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol's global entry for inbound arrivals to the U.S. And biometrics really are, I think, a big part of the future of the airline passenger experience, especially right now at airports. They offer an added level of security, a very safe method to validate who the customer is. And I think one of the important benefits of biometrics is because you can use fingerprints or iris scans. It also is, I think, very flexible in terms of culture. Think, for example, of people from the Middle East, where it may be easier to just scan your eyes than to have your fingerprint scanned because you may be wearing a bulky garment. So, what I like about biometrics is also it can be very, very efficient. TSA has told me on the record that they're able to process twice as many people per hour through a TSA pre-check lane compared to standard security.
Wow.
And part of that pre-check is using biometrics. Clear further expedites that, but that just gets you into the head of the line. I think that airlines also like biometrics because it is a tool to further reduce fraud. And, while a lot of their focus on fraud is with the purchase of a ticket, as we see mobile devices such as the new Apple X phone using facial recognition, if you have Apple X phone, if you have your biometrics stored and you have stored them with the airline and agree to let the airline share that information, or Apple share that with your biometrics with the airline, and you use something like Apple Pay, it introduces an added level of security in terms of protecting you as you make a transaction. JetBlue has said that using biometrics at its gates in Boston has sped up boarding, and people actually like it. And to JetBlue's credit, they did a very smart marketing spin on it. Take a selfie with your as you board the plane, and so using the information, using biometrics, can lead to a more efficient, safer experience for the traveler, and help the airlines reduce fraud and potentially other harm.
And with JetBlue, I think you've mentioned that they've told you that they have no interest in owning this database of biometric data, because obviously there are concerns anytime you get into biometrics that who's using this, who's keeping it, can they be hacked, cyber concerns. But at least this airline, JetBlue, has told you that they will not be abusing this or keeping it as a database.
Absolutely correct. And in fact, I think it's also noteworthy that Clear, while Delta has invested in Clear, Delta does not own Clear, and the biometric data is Clear's. It's in Clear's databases, not Delta's. So I think you will see airlines have an approach of want to use it, don't want to keep it when it comes to biometric data. Airlines are keenly focused on our security. And they don't want to be on the front pages of a news site or the lead-in story about biometric data being hacked. It's embarrassing enough for them when they've had the IT problems in the past. They certainly don't want to see biometric data at risk of being leaked or stolen. So I think you will see this, the airlines use biometric data, but I think you will see them use it as a, if you will, third party to organizations that actually store it.
And let's talk about some of the terms that we've thrown out here: pre-check, global entry, and clear. Mm-hmm. I just used clear the other day, and a woman turned to me who was in a different line and said, how can I get that? So let's just briefly talk about this, because I actually think global entry may be one of the best values in travel. A lot of people don't know it's $100 for 5 years, and you get pre-check included. So you can use pre-check domestically, but then when you're coming back from international, global entry, you can just sort of wave to all those people in those that massive line that you see over there, and just sort of skip through. So I think global entry is great. And then clear, we actually have a promo code, listeners. Use the promo code Voyage, and you'll get 3 months free. That you skip the pre-check line. You don't even need your boarding pass. You just, or your ID, excuse me. You put your fingerprints on there. You scan your boarding pass. You don't need to show ID, and you move right on through. Do you think all those 3 programs, Henry, have a long future ahead of them?
I do. I will say that I'm a big fan of the global entry and TSA pre-check programs, and they have saved me a lot of time. Adding in Clear has saved me even more time. What I like about Clear also is that at airports when I'm traveling on an international airline that has not yet joined the TSA pre-check program here in the U.S., using Clear can at least get me to the head of the line for the standard security screening process. So it doesn't save me as much time, but it does save me a bit of time, sometimes very long lines at major gateway airports. And I do think that they have a long future. Obviously, the pre-check and global entry programs are administered by U.S. government agencies, so I don't think there's any danger in those going away. A couple of years ago, I was wondering whether Clear would be able to make it, but then Delta chose to invest, and to its credit, Delta said, okay, we're going to make sure Clear gets installed at our key hub airports and other major markets, and they started giving out membership either for free or at discounted rates to their SkyMile Medallion members, and then Clear struck agreements with some sporting venues. For example, here in San Francisco, you can use Clear at AT&T Park, where the San Francisco Giants baseball team plays when they're in season. So I think that Clear has a brighter future ahead of it than it did a couple of years ago. I think the next challenge, though, is for the government agencies to work together to knit their programs together so that travelers, especially frequent international travelers, have better access to these biometrics-based screening programs. If you're, for example, enrolled in Customs and Border Patrol Global Entry, you should be able to get access to the equivalent lanes whether you're in France or England or Paris or whatever. And likewise, those travelers should have access to global entry or something like it here in the U.S.
And I'm glad you mentioned the availability of Clear at stadiums, also Yankee Stadium, Citi Field in New York, American Airlines Arena in Miami. So it is a value that people may want to look into as well. Listeners, we are going to ask Henry in a little bit here for his tips for travelers. Certainly these would be some of them. I think, Henry, I haven't added it up, but it's got to have saved me days in customs and immigration using that global entry. I mean, if you figure an hour every time, it really is, I think, one of the best values in aviation today. Let's talk a little bit about hotels and lodging. We just did a podcast with Hotel Tech Report, which was fascinating about the ways technology is changing the hotelier and lodging experience for guests. Now that we've got Airbnb, we've got other competitors that are putting pressure on these traditional hotel brands, where do you see the lodging experience going?
Well, the lodging experience, I think, is going to continue to focus, obviously, on providing guests with comfort and security. Airbnb, no question, has challenged the lodging industry, unlike, I think, anything probably since the beginning of franchising and branded hotels.
Wow.
Our research shows that in the U.S. and elsewhere, you have close to or more than 20% of travelers using home sharing services like Airbnb, HomeAway, and others at least once. And among the leisure travelers, it's getting close to 10%. So, home sharing has redefined what, quote, hotel, unquote, means. And what's interesting is you now see hotels reaching out to Airbnb and other home sharing hosts, offering their professional housekeeping services. You now see hotels reaching out and saying, hey, even if you're staying at Airbnb, come to us for dinner or something like that. I think in the case of hotels, it's not like you're going to see the all-suite hotel, make a resurgence because real estate is simply too expensive. Instead, I think you're going to see hotels focus their room design on how to be homier, if you will, how to make better use of that space. But I also think you will see hotels focus on things such as emphasizing safety and security, and the fact that when you are staying at a hotel, you are in a professionally run lodging environment as opposed to somebody's home, that there's professional grade housekeeping and so on. You will see hotels make greater use of their customer data to personalize offers to you. And yes, there's going to be more price competition because research shows that Airbnb and other home sharing services generally can save a traveler between 10% and sometimes more than 30% over the cost of a hotel room. Even when there are major events in the city, Super Bowl, Comic-Con, political convention, Dreamforce, like we have here in San Francisco, the Airbnb type accommodations, home sharing accommodations, are still less expensive than a traditional hotel.
Well, now they've sparked so many other types of services that you hear about. Oh, this is the Airbnb of, and then fill in the blank. We did a podcast 33, a couple of months ago with Hip Camp, which is basically the Airbnb of private lands for camping. And I mean, really, this cottage industry of sharing that's taking off. I have noticed that hotels are starting to expand some of their pricing options. For example, book on our site will give you an additional 5 or 10% off.
Right.
Adding auctions for points. Trying various things. Well, if you book with us, we throw in free internet. I suppose trying to incentivize people to come to them, not book with a third party, and not go to a site like Airbnb or Vacation Rental by Owner.
You're correct, and this campaign is going into its second year now with mixed results. Some hotels told me that frankly they've not seen these programs work out as well as they want to. It is designed to shift us to book directly with the hotel brand or with the property through one of its digital channels or even its call centers. As opposed to using an online travel agency such as Hotels.com or Priceline. Traditional travel agencies, I should point out, usually are exempt from some of the same restrictions. And in fact, traditional travel agencies, because they use the global distribution systems like Sabre and Amadeus, may sometimes even have access to some of those discounted rates. But if you book direct with the hotel, you may be eligible for a modest discount on your room rate. It had originally been 10%. It's been scaled back to generally 2% to 5%. But you may also be eligible to receive complimentary internet, and you are less likely to be moved to a different hotel, what the hotel industry calls walking, the equivalent of airlines bumping you, if the hotel finds itself oversold. So there are advantages to booking on the hotel website. You also see all room types and all rate types, including AARP, Auto Club, and promotional rates, which sometimes the online travel companies do not list.
Listeners, it is time for us to ask Henry to get out his crystal ball as we look into the future of all things travel. Let's talk, Henry, if we could, about self-driving jet bridges, other innovations like wearables that may impact and change our travel experience.
Sure.
What do you see coming in 5 years, 10 years or so? I think you've even referred to a golden age of travel approaching or already here. So look into your crystal ball for us and give us your forecast.
Sure. So I think that obviously as companies like Apple, Samsung, Google, and others introduce new wearable devices, travel is going to be an area where those will see a lot of utility. If you look at smartwatches and the fact that you can load your boarding pass on there and scan that until we do get to a point where biometric-based boarding becomes standard, wearables do have value. And, the next generation of smart glasses, whether they come from Google or others, will help with wayfinding and potentially let you know of discounts or promotional offers from airport vendors, or even using augmented reality, merchants and businesses that could be near your hotel or wherever else you're staying. So I see a very bright future ahead for wearables, provided, of course, that they are aesthetically appealing. Some of the first things kind of look like devices for nerds. I mean, they just were not, they didn't have the right sense of design style. They were a little clunky. They weren't as intuitive to use. They made people feel uncomfortable, but they were also expensive. As the price point comes down and they become more affordable and the utility becomes better, I think you'll see a lot more people embrace those, though it'll be, I think, a slow build on them, even 5 to 10 years from now. I'm not sure if you'll see even half of travelers using wearables. One thing that I am intrigued about are these in-ear devices. They call them hearables because it's not just a wearable. You can actually hear through it. But it offers simultaneous language translation. I believe Google is testing this now. And when you think about the benefit this could offer us when we travel internationally, or for anyone who works with international visitors, a restaurant, a hotel, an airline, it will help people provide better service to that traveler. And so hopefully that means less stress and more satisfaction. Again, I think biometrics will play a huge role as part of this as well. The self-driving jet bridges is something I smile about because I received the first inquiry about this in 2002 when I worked for Forrester Research as an analyst.
That's a long time ago. Wow.
It was 15 years ago. And now we are finally starting to see tests of these in the market. It may be a few years, literally maybe 2 to 3 years before these become good enough to use every day. But you will see over the next 5 years, 10 years, not just self-driving jet bridges, but self-driving bag carts and other ground service equipment at airports and at hotels and on cruise ships. You may see more of these robots, if you will, that shuttle to guest rooms, either delivering towels or room service meals or whatever else it may be to provide more efficient service to the guest. So I don't think you will see self-driving fuel trucks. I don't think you will see self-driving tugs at the airport pushing airplanes in or guiding them out of gates or towing them to and from hangars. There's some things that are simply, I think, the airline's insurance companies probably will mandate have a human there. But you will see a lot more self-driving or autonomous vehicles, autonomous devices at the airport. The next thing is, when will we see autonomous airplanes? And I think that's, a 10-year window.
Wow.
You will start to see the first iteration of those within a few years. Uber has said they want to offer self-piloted autonomous vehicles for short-haul air travel, Uber Air, they call it. And I think they're looking at Dubai and Los Angeles possibly as two of their launch markets or test markets. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see because we don't think of that necessarily as travel. But if you've ever had to navigate rush hour traffic in LA, it's a trek. And if you can fly from the east side of LA or Pasadena or wherever it may be, Long Beach, up to the west side or Malibu or wherever, that's a trip, and that's something you don't have to drive.
Now, wait a minute. This brings up an etiquette question. If I have a self-driving robot bring me extra towels to my hotel room, do I have to tip the robot?
I don't think so. In fact, that's something some travelers may like.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. We're going to check back with Henry in 5 years to see if all of his forecast here has come true. But listeners, it's now time to ask him for his tips for both the frequent and frequent travelers. Henry, how many miles, by the way, do you fly every year? I'm sure you've flown so much you have all these tips sort of stored in your brain by now.
250,000 to 300,000 miles is my typical as I say, but in-seat air mileage each year.
But so that's basically double what you need for the top status on most airlines.
Right. And, I do concentrate my flying with a couple of airlines, which is fairly typical for frequent travelers. But I will say this. The airlines have changed their loyalty programs a great deal. And they, with the combination of changing in benefits and limited award availability, reduction in amenities, and so on, I would say that I'm hearing from a lot of people, why should I be loyal to an airline? And I understand that sentiment. There are a lot of people who are saying, if I can find an extra legroom seat that I want, or a first class seat or premium cabin seat that I want, and it's in my budget, I'll buy it, even if they're paying the differential between coach and that higher fare out of their own pocket. So I find benefit from the loyalty programs, but I would just say that I encourage people to shop around, look at things such as the on-time performance and the reliability of an airline and its flights, because if the airline is constantly late, or it doesn't have good reliability, in other words, it doesn't operate as many of the flights that it says it will, your trip, whether it's a business trip or a leisure trip, is not going to go well. And so do take a look at that. It may be worth a premium to you to have the added confidence of flying on airlines that have better reliability and better on-time performance. The other thing I would add is do whatever you can and whatever you can afford to reduce the sharp edges that are associated with air travel, whether that is signing up for pre-check, for example, or global entry, signing up for priority boarding and paying for that if necessary, taking an extra legroom seat. That's something that, if that can provide less stress to you, it's worth it. It's especially true for families, and I realize that the irony here is families often have tight budgets, but when you're traveling with children and you're not eligible to get on the plane early because your kids may be too old, being in one of the earlier groups may indeed be valuable for you. Take a look at airport lounges. Sometimes they offer a reasonable price, and if you have a long layover or get to an airport early enough, it can provide a comfortable and productive environment for you to wait. And if it's airline operated, then sometimes those agents can assist you if something goes wrong. Do shop around. There are some very clever websites such as dohop.com that can help create, and Kayak is another, that can help create what the industry calls self-connecting itineraries. So this could be between two airlines that don't have formal business relationships, but the schedule works and the fare works, and it may be less expensive than taking a traditional airline. But if you do that, just beware, you may have to reclaim your luggage, re-clear security, and check in 2 different times with the airlines. So it's not as smooth as, for example, connecting between one airline and its regional partner or its alliance partner. But if you're flexible, if you have time, and if budget is paramount, it may help save you some money. It's especially good for international travel.
And I think, speaking of that, here in the U.S., I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think if you build an itinerary with Delta and American, they no longer have that interline agreement, you may have the baggage issue domestically as well, right?
That is correct. And in fact, with some airlines, they won't even check your baggage onto all of their alliance partners if your ticket isn't in the same itinerary. So again, that policy can vary airline to airline. But it used to be that the big airlines all had what they called interline or ticketing and baggage agreements, where they would sell on one another, accept one another's tickets, and check baggage between the airlines. One of the downsides to consolidation is you've seen airlines build walls around their alliances and partners, and they're less likely to do this. And frankly, we as the traveler get caught. And no better example was just a few months ago when Delta had an IT issue and the airline could not rebook its customers on American because of this lack of an agreement that at Delta's choice they severed with American. So, there are a lot of people who miss flights and business meetings and family events and other things because of that. I'd like to see the airlines focus more on serving the needs of the customer, and without putting their balance sheet at risk or their profits at risk. They've got to realize that the customer has to come first.
Well, in fact, we just did a report on VoyageReport.com a couple weeks ago that only one U.S. airline recently snagged 5 stars for on-time performance, and it wasn't any of the big 3. It was Hawaiian, so certainly there's a lot of room for improvement. One final tip, you had mentioned global entry and for families on a budget. It's important to note that some credit cards now will actually reimburse you for the cost of that $100 global entry fee.
That's true. Some will. Some airlines may also offer that as a benefit of elite status, so it's worth looking into that as you consider which airlines to fly. And again, do shop around. Some of the credit cards that offer these benefits, though, do come with very high interest rates if you miss a payment. So, you have to be an informed consumer.
Buyer beware, as always, right?
Correct.
Henry Harteveldt is the president and travel industry analyst at the Atmosphere Research Group in San Francisco. You can follow him on Twitter, where he is absolutely prolific, at Harteveldt, Harteveldt. You'll be in very good company. Henry, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and insight and that crystal ball forecast with our listeners. We sure appreciate it.
Mark, thank you for allowing me to be part of your broadcast. I enjoyed it.
Listeners, what do you think about these changes we've seen in travel? Does it make you want to travel more or less? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for our future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.